All right, here we are. Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining the stream or checking out this recording afterwards. We had a great week last week. A bunch of folks talking on the chat, and it was great to interact. So if you're watching, please interact. Please let us know what your thoughts are. Let me know what your experience is in your React Native development or questions you have about testing, because we're going through one example of code right here together, but your experience may be different, and we'd love to hear your perspective. So I'm Josh Justice. I'm Coding It Wrong online, and that's where you can find me. And we are test driving an app together in React Native. We're using Detox for end-to-end tests, and we're using Enzyme for component tests, and it's going great so far. So the app we're building, I have little notes here to describe it, to summarize it well. Yeah, so we're building an app to rate dishes at restaurants, because whenever I go to restaurants that have lots of different kinds of dishes, I forget what I've had and what I liked and what I didn't like. So that's what we're doing. It's going to be great. I'm going to get a lot of use out of it. It's going to be really good. And so maybe you can too. It's all open source. You can check out the source. You can download it. You can contribute. Nobody sent in a PR last week to make the look and feel of the app better, so I'm still waiting on that one. If you have a design sense, that would be really great to jump in. No pressure, but it'll be fun. Today what we're going to do, so we've built out our first feature using test-driven development to add a new restaurant to the list. You can actually see it here if I run the end-to-end test real quick. So one nice thing about those end-to-end tests is they kind of give you a little tour of the app, and they run in the simulator, and they run at a speed you can actually watch them and see. So the app pops up, we tap on new restaurant, we type in a new restaurant name, sushi place, we save it, and it shows up in the list, and that's where we've gotten so far. So, before we move on to like a new feature in the app, there's some things I wanted to add to this feature to kind of round them out, to get them nice and to get it nice and robust. And so one thing is, like if you just tap around the app in the UI, you can find out. So there's no cancel button. So there's no way, like once you decide you're going to add a restaurant, you are committed. Like you have to add a restaurant. So we're good to go there. So we don't want to do that. We want a way to cancel out. So let's build that feature first, and then there's a few other kind of minor edge cases I'd like to handle in here. So as I've been starting and playing around with React Native test-driven development on my own, in some circumstances, so as I was doing that, I would actually write the end-to-end tests to write out the cancel behavior. I'd have a test that allows me to, should allow canceling, creating a restaurant. I'd go into the modal, I'd cancel out, and then I'd have the next test go in and actually create the restaurant. And that's great, but I found that with React Native end-to-end tests, like they're running faster than you could type stuff in, and it's certainly faster than doing it manually, but they're not the fastest thing in the world. There's delays as animations are happening and things like that. And so I found even with a really small app, that end-to-end test started getting tedious. The fact that it was going in and canceling and going back in again was not great. That takes us away from the approach that's been advocated in some circles for end-to-end tests of a feature tour. Like kind of go through, take the user on a sequence through the app of doing a bunch of various teams and various things in the app, and that can save you on a lot of the overhead of stopping and starting tests over and over again. And so the cancel button doesn't really work. That doesn't really meet the criteria for the user story there. So a lot of times in a lot of environments, folks recommend testing the happy path in an end-to-end test and just testing edge cases in lower level unit tests or component tests. And that's what we're going to do now. So let's pull up our add restaurant modal test here. Let's look over what we've written before. So we describe the case, and so remember, with our component tests here, we're not doing snapshot tests where we're recording the entire look and feel or not look and feel, but the entire component tree. We're not even making assertions really directly against the component tree. We're testing against behavior. And so we say when we submit the modal, and then we go in, we create an add restaurant modal component, we type in a text field, we press a button, and then we check two things. We check that the text field is cleared out, and we check that the handle save event handler has been called. And that's all we do. Like that's all that our test is coupled to. So it's really loosely coupled to the implementation of our app. And so really we want to test the cancel button behavior at the same level. And again, like because this is a component test, it's not going to like fully ensure that it's all the way fully hooked up in our app. In fact, we'll be able to show you that we're going to test this and yet it won't be fully hooked up in our app. And let's just see how that flow goes. Again, if you really want to fully end-to-end test every edge case in your app, your test suite's going to be really slow. And that's not just a be patient thing. Like the deal with test-driven development is you want a quick feedback loop. So let's give this a try. So we'll say we want another grouping here, another describe for a different situation. This one was upon submit, so we want to say describe upon cancellation. And again here, we are going to write out the test first. We're going to let it go red, and then from there, we're going to be able to implement the real production behavior. So let's see here. I actually wrote a test. Well, let's just do yarn test watch to run our end-to-end tests. And those will run in the panel over to the side here, so we'll be able to see feedback in real time as we save the file. Juddy, thank you for saying hey. Good to see you here again. I know it's an early morning for you over in New Zealand, so thank you for joining. CMCA boy, C Macaboy, you said, what library are you using to simulate the press? Is that enzyme? Yes, so we're using the enzyme library here in the component test. And then down here, it's the enzyme's shallow method here to give us a wrapper, and then we're calling methods on the wrapper. Aman himself, good to see you again. It was great talking with you on Twitter and everything. Glad you're here. But yes, so enzyme is what I'm using here at the component level for generally most of the testing. All right, so let's go. So upon cancellation, and this I'm gonna cheat as I usually do and look back at my previous test. So we're gonna say we might not really necessarily need a separate before each if we're only testing one thing coming out of here. We'll see. But let's just do it to keep things parallel. So let's say whatever things we're going to assert, and remember before we had assertions, one test per expectation, having a separate test for each little thing that we're testing against. So let's think about cancellation here. So the before each is all the setup will do regardless of what we're testing against. So we'll say we're probably going to need a handle cancel. Let's delete that and come back to kind of go through the flow of thought. So we know we're going to need an add restaurant modal. We want it to be visible. True, that we need the modal needs to be shown on the screen. And so previously we had an on-save event handler. So let's just delete that out. You probably see where I'm going with this, but let's go through the thought process. So really, we don't care about whether we've entered in the text field or not. We might want to test that we've cleared out the text field. Let's do that. I like that. So we'll go ahead and type in some message text into the test field, and then instead of pressing the Save Restaurant button, we'll call it the Cancel Add Restaurant button. So we will have typed in some text, but we're going to go ahead and cancel it. And so let's copy these assertions here, these test cases. We'll say it clears the text field again because we've already got clearing the text field when we save, so that would be nice to have it nice and consistent. So let's assert here that in the wrapper, when we find the restaurant name text field, we're going to check again that the value is equal to the empty string. And then we're going to say, so yeah, now we're getting the assertion here. When in the save circumstance, we call an on-save handler. And so probably we should have an on-cancel handler as well. That makes a lot of sense. Because we don't know. I guess really it's the... Yeah, it could be we're letting the parent control. We don't know for sure. Our component doesn't know whether saving or canceling the component causes the modal to be hidden. You see that we haven't made any assertions up here in the save command about whether the value of visible is changed or anything like that. We're just calling out the responsibility of this component is just to call out to an on-cancel handler. So we're going to need a handle cancel here. And we don't really want to pass parameters to it. I suppose you could design it differently, but in our case here, we don't want to send the message text to the cancel handler. I think in jest we want to say expect handle cancel to have been called, and we want to pass nothing to it. So that makes sense. I think here I'm expecting us to get some linter errors here. I'm saving the test, and so let's see here. I suppose the test would fail if nothing else. This is interesting that this is running. Here we go. Handle cancel is not defined. So I'm not actually sure why my linter is not running here. That's interesting. But regardless, let's just copy down these fields set up for here. So in our upon cancellation test, we have the message text that we're entering. Although really that's now only used in one place here. We have message text only used there, so we can actually just fill that in. We're filling in some text, but we never assert against it. We just assert that the text is actually cleared out to an empty string later. So cool. Oh yeah, and we need to set the value of handle cancel. Just like in the submit scenario, we set a handle save handler. Down here, we're going to set a handle cancel to adjust mock function, and that's going to allow us to call expect handle cancel to have been called. So let's save this. And I suppose you could write out just one test at a time if you want, but here I'm looking at an existing test scenario, and I know that I want to assert very similar things, so I felt okay copying those over. That seemed productive to me. All right, so let's scroll up. Maybe it's a little too much. Maybe not. Wow, this is a lot of different errors. I think probably this is because we're watching. So let me just, press enter to clear it out again, and we'll get a nice clean screen here. I'm now confusing myself. So upon cancellation, it calls the onCancel handler. Upon cancellation, calls the onCancel the enter text. Okay, we're getting a few different errors within here, so that's fine. Clears the text field, clears the text field. So let's go up. Oh yeah, so if I scroll all the way up to the top, we see here the first error clears the text field. You can see here, even with this little bit of uncertainty, that like if I just written one expectation at a time, it would have prevented a little confusion to slow me down just there. So it's kind of nice. But cool, so let's say upon cancellation, it clears the text field. And so it says here, method simulate is only meant to be run on a single node, 0 found instead. So what this error is saying is that the cancel add restaurant button is not found. So that's pretty easy to change. We're just going to add that button into the component. And I see we have a linter error because I added a linting check that says to make sure we have no unused variables, because I was getting frustrated last time that those were getting kept in. So now I see that React Native View is not needed, so I can delete that out, and that's kind of nice. So to go back to what we were doing, we're adding a new button. It's a cancel button, and like usual, I'm giving no thought to layout whatsoever. We're going to call this the cancel add restaurant button. We will go ahead and give it a title. We'll just call it cancel, but we're not going to hook up this behavior yet. This kind of gives us just enough code, more or less, to pass the test, or to fix the current error we're getting. All right, so now under the test clears the text field, we're getting an error. I think this was being checked before, but we had a previous error we were focusing. Now it says expect the value to equal empty string, but it was actually still hello world. So we expected, to go back to the test, we expected the text field to be cleared out to empty string, and it was not. The text that we entered in here was still there. So we want to replicate the behavior that is there for the handle press save button action, and we're going to do that function, that method, and we're going to do that for the cancel button here. So we'll say press cancel button. And we may find that there's some duplication here we want to remove later. Maybe, maybe not. We're not sure. But for right now, we can just kind of write out the simplest thing that passes the tests, and we can consider doing refactoring later. So I was about to copy and paste a block of code, but just at that same time, I was saying, let's write the simplest thing first. So I think I'm going to stick with that, and I'm actually going to write out the new function, and we'll just decide what we want to copy over. So we've got a handle press cancel button. We've got an arrow function class property here just to make the binding nice and simple, so we can just pass in this.handle press cancel button. Okay, so that does not actually accomplish anything yet. I think what we want to go ahead and set the state of restaurant name to empty string, and that's all we need to do right now. So let's give it a save and see what happens. That should pass that test right now, I believe. All right, so we see here that upon cancellation, it clears the text field. And just a little note, I hinted at this in a previous session, but as we look here, the fact that we have multiple describes under here that each have multiple tests underneath them gives us a nice hierarchy. So we can see in add restaurant modal, upon submit, here's 2 things we want to happen. Upon cancellation, here's 2 other things we want to happen. And so we get this nice documentation of the behavior of the component. All right, so our second test under here is not working. The cancellation, it is not calling the onCancel handler with the entered text. Oh, that test name is not good. That is not what we want. It calls the onCanceled handler. We do not pass it the entered text. That is not part of what we want to do. So I'll just take that occasion to rename the test. It'll rerun automatically. So now we're saying it should call the onCancel handler, but it is not. All right, here. As we expected the mock function to have been called, it was not called. And so now we can just replicate the behavior that we had working in the save button and do something very similar. So in the save button, we extracted an onSave prop. So in the cancel method, we're going to do an onCancel. And then we're just going to call it. After we set the state to clear out the restaurant name, we're just going to call onCancel. And there's not much else to do because we're not passing any data to it. We're just letting the parent component know that a cancellation has happened. There's no data to pass along. All right, so we'll save this. I think this will pass the test. And that's good to actually say in advance. No, it has made things so much worse. What have we done? Okay, and that's okay. We see here that onCancel is not a function, and so that has not been passed in. So in the way we set up the test, onCancel was not passed in. So with save, we passed it in here. With cancel, we did not, and so we'll add that in. And that's actually totally fine. We could take this as an occasion to say, oh, we want our component to work even if we don't pass in a cancel action, but I am going to try to keep the component as minimal as possible right now because this is a component just in my application. So I'm going to build only the minimum needed now for this application. If you were building a reusable component library, you might be more focused on building your component tests first, and you might want to handle that robustness at that point. It's different philosophies on building. All right, we've rerun the test, and I expect them all to pass now, and sure enough, we do. So our test is now saying upon cancellation, upon clicking cancel, you could even say that, upon clicking cancel, it clears the text field and it calls the onCancel handler. So that's all great. That's good to go. And so we can quit out of the component test here, and we can run Detox for our end-to-end tests. Again, we can pass the -r flag to avoid sending up the whole binary because we haven't done anything different at the iOS level. We're just going to have it rerun and reload the JavaScript bundle that's coming from the dev server up here, and we'll see how it goes. I have a suspicion. Do you? You may remember from session 2. We're running the thing here where sometimes in the simulator the software keyboard doesn't come up, and so the test hangs. Cool, and it actually passed. So this is not what I expected. I did not expect this to happen because I was thinking the app would blow up because we have not actually attached an onCancel handler to the component. So let's do it manually and see it blow up, if we can get it to blow up. Okay, we open the modal, we tap cancel, and we get that error we got on our test. OnCancel is not a function. Okay, cool. So this is the risk of test driving something at the component level, but not having an end-to-end test to cover it. And so there's a couple different approaches you could take. Like you could write an end-to-end test to drive out this cancellation behavior to be sure it would be tested at the end-to-end level. You could do manual testing like I just did to make sure it all comes together. Or when you're building out your component, you could build it more robustly and ensure that it doesn't error out when an onCancel attribute is not passed into the component. But in that case, it still wouldn't give us the correct application behavior that we want because the cancel button wouldn't have been hooked up to anything. So there's trade-offs there. There's a lot of pros and cons. I would say if this was like a core flow, I mean, this is a very small app, so like everything's core because there's only a few functions. But if you had like an e-commerce app, then maybe you would actually want to more thoroughly do end-to-end tests for the core flows of adding a product to the cart and checking out, and to make sure everything there was totally smooth and having end-to-end tests. But for more secondary things, maybe you don't want to cover them as much with the end-to-end tests. There's lots of trade-offs. For now, we're just going to rely on this manual testing that we have, and we're going to fix this error with the cancel button. So we're going to go back, I believe it's to the restaurant list component. Yes, so this is where the add restaurant modal is called. So we're going to do it on cancel handler, and we're going to say this.handle cancel add restaurant, and we're going to make a method up here. Again, it receives no parameters. And so all we're really going to do here is, instead of copying and pasting and giving in that temptation, I'll type it in. We're going to set the state. And what we're going to set in the state is, and we don't need to use an arrow function here because we're not depending on any previous data. Really, we're just saying, is the add modal visible? No. And that's what we should be doing. So this should fix the error and cause the modal to be actually closed. Let's reload it and ensure that we got new restaurant, we cancel out, it closes. That's great. Add a restaurant and actually add it, and it comes up just fine. Oh, and note that if we type in here, cancel out and reopen it, the text field is in fact cleared out, and so that's nice. All right, so I've actually already made it a new branch for this for additional new restaurant cases. So let's add these to a commit. Let's do this as a separate commit. I like to keep my commits nice and small. So this fixing of this linter error, we can make that a separate commit. So, all right, this is all the changes we're committing right now, and we're going to say remove unused import. This keeps things nice and clean. And now we're going to add handle press cancel button. Add restaurant modal. Here's the button. Handle cancel add restaurant. And then here's the test. And I would actually, I'll actually commit, what am I looking at here? Yeah, so the changes, so yeah, in this case we had a unit test, or a component test, the changes to the component to match it, and then changes to the broader application to keep things working. I'm going to include those all in one commit. If you wanted to, you could have them separate. It just depends on how much you want to break things down. Add cancel button to add restaurant modal. All right, so that's one nice little edge case that we handled. So another edge case I wanted to handle was I would like when we open up the modal, you may not have noticed this, and this is actually something that the test doesn't necessarily catch for us, at least the way Detox is set up. When I open the modal, the text field is not highlighted right away. Also, it's also not 100% obvious that it's a text field, so more visual work could be done to make this better. But when we tap on it, that's when the cursor appears, and the software keyboard appears, and everything's good. So I would love it if when we open this modal for the cursor to show up in there. Let's take, I haven't looked into this. Let's take a brief look at the Detox Docs, and we'll just see if they have anything to say about how you can assert that a cursor is in there. They might very well. Detox is a great library, but I would not fault them if they did not. So let's check it out here. We're on the Detox website, just Wix Detox in GitHub, in the readme/documentation. And let's check expectations here. This is the page on things you can expect. Checking if things are visible, if they exist or do not, if they have text, if they have value. So yeah, so that's not making it obvious. So yeah, it's not really clear. Let me do a quick Google to see. Docs test if text field is focused. Type text to currently focused input. Yeah, here we go. So here's an issue. It would be nice to type text into any element that is currently focused. That way we can test certain workflows where the input should autofocus. That's exactly what we're looking for. Let's see if anything happened. Okay, got a solution for this on Android. Types. Interesting. Locked and limited the conversation to collaborators. So there has not been a clear answer. Okay, Leo Natan said won't fix. And I think that was from maybe a lack of information from the original poster, so maybe we could follow up on sometime. But there's not currently a feature that we can find to do that, and that's okay. Again, I don't feel the need for everything to be covered by tests. I am obsessed with testing, and so it would be great if it could be, but there's real pros and cons, and so we don't need to make our tests fragile or slow. We want things to be reliable, so we can just kind of add this in manually. That's totally fine. And there will always be things, at least in a user-facing application like this, that aren't covered by tests. Even if you had snapshot testing, even if you had visual regression testing to confirm that the screen was still pixel perfect, and expending maybe a lot, well, I don't know, maybe that's easy, maybe that's a lot of effort. But still, like the smoothness of animations, like that could still be something that would be hard to test, and who knows, maybe somebody will implement that. It certainly seems possible. But I, just for my personal philosophy, I would imagine there's always a human element of just what the app feels like. So if you're always going to have some manual testing, it's okay to add some things in like this. So I don't actually remember off the top of my head what we can do to focus on that element. So let's just kind of take a look through the React native docs. Text input, handling focus. I think there was actually maybe in the docs, we're not using a native text input, but I think the React native elements that we're using is based on text input and has all the same properties. So let's see here. Autofocus, that looks right. Autofocus, if true, focuses the input on component did mount. The default is false. And yeah, I was kind of trying to remember how this worked because, in traditional web or traditional native development, you might have a focus method that you could imperatively call to get the element to be focused. But React is more declarative, and so you tend to just declare the state of what your UI should be like. And so in this case, we're declaring that this text input should be an autofocus text input. And then React Native takes care, or the React library underneath, takes care of running the appropriate imperative commands when the appropriate thing happens. So I think autofocus might be all we need. So let's just give that a try here. I think in the modal, we have a text field. We have a form input. Again, this is imported from React Native elements. So we could look it up in there, but let's just give it a try. We'll say autofocus equals true. We'll save it. We'll reload in the simulator. And let's see here. It's a moment of truth. When I open this modal, will the text field be autofocused? It is. That's great. So we can cancel out. We can open it. We can type in it. We can save, reopen it, and it's there and good to go. So we should definitely go ahead and rerun our tests before we commit this to make sure they haven't broken, because minor things like this can make a difference. Maybe Detox does not like the fact that there's already something focused in that field, but I think it'll probably be fine because I think in my own apps I've probably used autofocus before. Let's give it a try. The ideal of your test is that they don't break. for unrelated purposes. And that way your tests aren't adding a lot of burden as you're maintaining. You can change things unrelated to the test while the test still give you focus. Okay, our end-to-end test still passed. Let's just, out of an abundance of caution, let's just run our component test as well. You never know if something might have broken. Testing is all about not making assumptions, but running your test to verify, to catch problems in advance. It's taking a couple seconds to spin up. My processor might be running a little slow here. Let me keep an eye on that to make sure. Cool, so they pass as well. All right, so let's add that, commit it. Autofocus in text field and add restaurant. That's just a nice, smoother experience. Open it, it's autofocus. That's great. It kind of even, the sliding up for the bottom with iOS's sliding up to the keyboard even kind of goes together kind of nicely. I like that. Sweet. Okay, so there was one other feature I was thinking of, and then if we've still got a bunch of time, we can move forward on the next feature, just kind of plan out where we go from here. The last feature is I wanted to validate that the restaurant name is not empty. So we open it up, save the restaurant, and now a restaurant with no name has been added. So that's not ideal. That would be great if we didn't have to do that. Cool. Tudenhog says, what are your specs for streaming this session? Are you running on a laptop or desktop? Cool. I will take this occasion to answer that. I'm running on a fairly new Mac Pro. I am new to streaming, so I have not set up any kind of custom rig. And I'm using OBS, which is, as far as I know, a common open source streaming software. And that's what I've been doing so far. Who knows? My only streaming expense so far has been a microphone to try to get the audio okay. But let me know what you think of the video, the audio quality on the stream and on the recordings later. And who knows? Certainly, if anyone is a streamer, feel free to jump in with advice on things I could do for my setup. Because I'm really enjoying streaming with all y'all. I definitely want to keep it up. And it's been great. So thanks for the question. All right, so again, we want now, and as our next feature, we want to confirm that the restaurant name is not empty before we submit it. And so if we look back at our end-to-end test, the reason this hasn't come out so far, and that's not a problem, but the reason this hasn't come up so far is that we really had the happy path in here. We want to allow creating a restaurant, and we go into the restaurant field, and we type in the restaurant name. So again, you could have your end-to-end test, and like a lot of the UI tests I've written over the years in different frameworks have had a case where I click save with like no values filled into the form, and I just confirm that things error out, or maybe I check all the different error messages that come out. But I don't feel the need to go here. Again, like I really want to stay on the happy path for the sake of keeping things efficient here. So I think I'm going to keep this at the component level as well. All right, so let's take a look at the component test for Add Restaurant Modal. And I have not actually set up a validation in a React Native app before, so it's going to be nice to see how that works out. I did see that React Native Elements had a nice little error field for a form, which is great because, again, I love not having to think about look and feel. It's going to be great. Okay, so let's think about our test. What are we specifying? What do we want our component to do? So in our Add Restaurant Modal, this is upon submitting, but it's kind of like there's a subgrouping here. So we could nest it another level deep, but that's a number of levels deep there. We have one describe for our Add Restaurant Modal. We have another describe for the situation upon submitting or upon cancellation. And then we have a couple different tests under here. Now, as it stands right now, in the before each here, we have actually put in where we enter the text. And so this would be different. Like the case here is we want to run our component and we want to simulate the press without entering the text. And so I'm not actually sure what arrangement of grouping or ungrouping I would prefer. And so I think what I'm going to do is just kind of create stuff with duplication, and I'm going to handle that in the refactoring phase. I'm going to look and see if I want to refactor the test after all. So I think I'm going to cheat this time. I'm going to copy and paste on submit, and I'm going to just group it at that level. I'm going to say upon submit with an empty restaurant with invalid data. Let's say that. Because we don't need a test case for every single possible type of invalid data, we'll just say some kind of invalid data. For now, we might change it out. We're not going to need a message text variable here because the whole point is we're not typing in anything. Handle save will be good to have because we're going to make sure that it's not been called. So we'll check into that shortly. We need the wrapper, of course, so that's all good to be set up. So now in our before each, we want to not type anything into the text field. But we want to press the Save Restaurant button. So now clearing the text field is not what we want. So I'm going to comment that out because we're going to want something similar to that in just a moment. So let's say first, let's test out one example at a time, one test case at a time, and this will feel a little bit different than before when we set up all of our its, all of our different expectations at the start. So we'll say it does not call the onSave handler, and we don't care what's passed or not because we don't want it to be called at all. It would be an error if it was called regardless of what. And let's use, because we're using Mocha, we can put in a dot only here so that only this part of the component test is run. No, I'm not using Mocha. That's right. In my end-to-end, in my component test here, I'm still using Jest because Jest for me was working better with Enzyme. So let me show things failing first, and then we'll come back to that real quick. So yarn test. I think actually right now doing dot only would be fine because we only have one component test file. And Jest has some parallelism going on, which can make it harder to do a dot only when you have multiple files, but we may be good for now. Tugendhad, I see you said people sometimes put specs at the bottom of a page on the About section. Cool, that's great. Yeah, like I have not even watched a whole lot of streams, honestly, so I'll take that advice, and I'd be happy to put that in there to help folks. It would be a great way for folks to give me advice on streaming as well if they want to contribute in that way. That'd be great. All right, so let's test out dot only and see when we have only one component test file if that actually works. And I'm going to go ahead and pass watch to my yarn test. You see that passes through to a call to Jest with my file parameters, and it passes the watch flag through. Yeah, so we can see here, it skipped these other tests and just ran this one failing one. So that's going to keep things more efficient and to fail fast from my test-driven development flow. So cool, so we're good to go now. So let's fix this first. First, let's confirm that it doesn't call the onSave handler. And then we'll be able to come back, because I actually have, it's going to be very easy for me to implement this, but showing the error on the page, I'm not as certain. Like, it could take me a little while. I'm not even sure exactly what I'm going to specify. So we're going to see how that works. So I want to get the onSave handler to be not called when we pass it with invalid data. So really, we want to go into the handle press save button here. We don't want to call onSave or clear out the restaurant name. That's kind of immaterial right now because it already contains the empty string. But so let's just kind of do this here. So let's check. We want to look at the restaurant name that was entered. And for now, we say if restaurant name triple equals. Oh, and I should comment about fonts because I'm so in love with font ligatures. If you wonder how, I get this crazy looking double equals and this crazy looking triple equals. If you can see it on your screen. There's a few different coding fonts that give those ligatures. You may have also noticed the arrows here. This is what got me hooked. I don't love the equal sign greater than syntax, but I do love these cool looking arrows. So there's a few different fonts. Fire Code is one of them. This is a free font that you can check out that has ligatures. All kinds of fancy looking stuff like that. It's very cool. The one I'm using is actually called Dank Mono, and I saw a couple of different people tweet about this. Most recently, I believe it was Kent C. Dodds that recommended it. It costs a little money, 40 British pounds, but it has some cool stuff. It has ligatures as well as having fancy italics over here. So I'm doing enough streaming now and presenting at meetups and stuff like that that I felt like I wanted to treat myself and buy this font, so I did it. So thank you, creator of Dank Mono. Let's see if we find your name. Dimitri, I can't pronounce your last name. Oh, that's the Oceanic Next color scheme. Cool, so the person that created this font has not listed their name, but thank you, whoever you are. Great. Whatever, fonts, good times. So this is just a triple equals, because triple equal checks are the safe way to do it in JavaScript. I think hopefully my linter would actually warn me if I did a double equals check. Let's see. What's this? If. It is not an it is an if. This is not a test. Here we go. And the linter said expected triple equals and saw double equals. So that's great. Triple equals is better for safety. Look into it as you're learning more about JavaScript and type conversion or coercion and how it works. Okay, so back to it. Restaurant name. We've confirmed that it's an empty string. What do we want to do? Well, right now the simplest thing to get what we've specified so far, it does not call the onSave handler. The simplest thing would be just to return right here. And I actually like this approach. This is called, this approach to coding is called a guard statement. So I could also wrap the whole body of this function, this method, in the if and say if restaurant name is not equal to empty string, then do the functionality. And that's totally valid as well. This is a nice short method, so you could go either way. But I kind of like the guard statement approach, because this sort of says this is the exceptional case. The main point of what this function, this method is doing is down here, but we're checking a few conditions at first. And if this weird thing happens, like restaurant name is equal to the empty string, let's bail out early and handle that exception. And so as you get into longer functions and methods, like that can just make things more readable. So I think this will work, and this is just enough right now to pass the current test. So let's see. We save it. It automatically reruns. Takes a little while to boot up. I think my JavaScript's going slow. So let's see here. Does not the onsave handler, looks like I have a... notice what I've done with copy and pasting. It's not good. So it says I did not change the actual implementation of the test. So great. So let's actually go back and comment up my changes to the code. And then, because I want to see the real test actually fail. And let's see if Visual Studio Code will tell me here to not to not have been called? Let's see. The test will tell me if that is not a method. To not have been called is not a function. So let's check the jest docs. Or let's just Google it. Interesting. All right, we're doing some investigation here. Function to not have been called. Let's look for not to have been called. I know how to do this in Mocha, but I'm not actually sure in Jest. So let's kind of browse through on the docs here. Sam, thank you for bailing me out. To have been called times 0. That's great. I do feel like this is more expressive in Mocha with Chai, but this definitely works out. And again, I cannot get Mocha working when I tried it the other week. So Jest is my only option for enzyme testing here. Let's try to have been called times 0. Expected mock function to have been called 0 times, but it was called 1 time. Sam, you have bailed me out. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. That's great. This is the great thing about live chat. Well, sweet. Okay, cool. So we are now asserting the right thing. And again, this is interesting. If I was doing this day to day, I probably would not have had the discipline to go back and change the test to make sure it was failing for the right reason. But it's very good to do that, because then I know that when I fix it, that it's actually really fixing it. All right, so now we rerun it. And now it passes. So we have successfully confirmed in the modal, upon submitting with invalid data, it does not call the onsave handler. So that's great. Cool. So now we can look at refactoring. And let's see here. I don't think there's anything to refactor. It seems fine so far. We might do some overall regrouping of stuff in the test here when we finish. But for now, let's kind of go ahead down the path that we're on to add the other thing we want to test against. So it's not that we want to clear the text field. It's that we want to, it displays a validation error on the screen. So we don't really care to check the contents of the text field. Again, you could test that the context of the text field is still the empty string, but part of the deal with test driving is like, well, like why? I mean, it's already doing that. That's the default behavior. Like, why would it change anything other than the empty string? And so by test driving like this, we end up only writing the test we need to drive the behavior we need to add. So instead, I want to look for a new field with a test ID, and let's call it name error message, restaurant name error message. And we're going to check the value. That's probably not right. Let's see if we can look for the texts. I don't remember in Enzyme if you can look for the text here. But let's see if we can get comparing down to here. Yeah, that should be inside of parentheses. Wrapper find where test ID text to equal empty string. Ooh, okay. Sam has chimed in. Thank you for looking into that. So you can chain a not in front of to have been called. I do want to take the detour to go back to this and see, and we can actually talk about the trade-offs of these two different ways to write the test. Let's actually go back to when the test is failing, because I want to look at the failing message. So we'll keep this version of the test not to have been called. Let's see what happens now. We'll see what the test output is, because the phrasing of the test error output is important as well. All right, expected not function not to be called, but it was called with empty string. Okay, cool. The parameter is not important to us here. We expected it not to be called, but it was. Okay, so if you look at that, compare that to the output when we say to have been called times 0. We see the output here is expected mock function to have been called 0 times, but it was called 1 time. So let's actually, I want to look at these two different error messages next to one another, because we can compare them, because this is good to look at the expressiveness of our error messages. So one of the error messages emphasizes, and I want to look at the actual writing of the test as well, because test code is application code as well, and so it's important for both the test code and the error messages to be usable. I mean, if you're in there in your test, when they fail, you want it to be productive, and you don't want it to be slowing you down big time. So if we write the test out, expect handle save to have been called times 0, that already to me is not the most readable in the world. In English, I would say expect to have been called 0 times. So I already have to do a little bit mental flipping to kind of understand it there. But it's not the biggest deal in the world, and it was fine if it was the only option. And then in the response, we say we expected it to be called 0 times, but it was called 1 time. So this gives us information about the number of times called. So certainly if we had a function that was called twice, but we needed it to be called 3 times, then this would be exactly what we needed, and that would be the perfect circumstance to use this this matcher. Is matcher the right word? I don't think it's the right word. This expectation in jest here. But in this case, we have another option. We can say we expect it not to have been called. One nice thing about jest, incidentally, is that there's only one way to write it. The not has to come here. You can't. There's no to not have been called. You saw how I was trying to figure out where the not should go, if anywhere, and I couldn't figure it out. So jest syntactically, this is the function, and so you got to chain it on the front. You can't stick it in the middle. So that's kind of nice. So expect it not to have been called. To me, that's more straightforward. Like, I don't want this to be called. Like, that just kind of conceptually fits with what I'm trying to express and get to. And then in the output here, expected mock function not to be called, but it was called with empty string. So the with empty string is not important in this case. That's not too important. Like, that doesn't help me. I guess it might be a little bit valuable to help me understand why it would be called, under what circumstance it is being called. But this part is really great. Expected not to be called, but it was. I like that. I think I prefer that. So I prefer the readability of the test code, and I prefer the readability of the expectation. So again, Sam, I appreciate it a lot, helping me find that. So let's put that in place. Expect save not to have been called. Put our code in. Make sure it passes. It's running. Cool, it passes. So now let's go back. And this will be good. This will be a good stopping point for today for the stream. If I can get there, we'll see how tied up I get on this. So we also want to check now that we get a validation error. And what I was trying to get at is look for an element called restaurant name error message, get its text. I don't know if that's right. We'll find out if it is or not. And expect its text to equal empty string. That's not right. So expect the text to equal. So here you could check that it's not empty. But just to make sure that I'm even asserting against the right thing, at least temporarily now, I want to check the text. And I'm going to say, let's just say required. That's nice and straightforward. That wouldn't change if we changed the name of the field restaurant name to name or something like that. Cool. Method text is only meant to be run in a single node. 0 found instead. So that's a good sign. There is a method text. That's good. We're learning. And this error, we've run across it today and several times before. Meant to be run in a single node, 0 found instead. So in Enzyme, this is not the most readable way for it to report this error, but I think what's going on here is that it's saying it didn't find the node. It did not find an element with test ID restaurant name error message. So cool. So let's proceed forward with that. We're going to fix this error now, just enough to fix this current test, and we'll add it in. But we don't have to just put in a text field. I think I do want to look up React Native elements. That's the kind of UI component library we've been using. We're just going to go through to their GUI app here. We're going to view them components. And it was under forms. I found out about this just at the last minute. So there's a form validation message. So beautiful. So preventing me from having to think or style. I love it. And incidentally, check this out. This is beautiful. This makes me so happy. So in the field there, like the underline into the text field, like it's butting up right against that button. Like that's super ugly. But luckily I procrastinated and I didn't actually try to style it. And so now when we put in the form validation message element, apparently that might actually fix it for us. So procrastinating on visual design is always the right thing to do. I highly recommend it. So, but yeah, so form validation message, we can see here, it just takes some text content inside of it, just like a React Native text element. So that's nice and straightforward. We're going to import the form validation message from React Native elements. This is in our add restaurant modal. And then down here, form validation message. And right now, we're just going to leave it without any contents. Oh, we are going to need that test ID, though, first, because it's going to want to check that. Copy over the test. I mean, heck, I can type in test ID. I am that bad a typist. That's great. Let's copy over the name. This is, in fact, our restaurant name error message. So let's save and let's see if this fixes. I think this will get us past our current error. All right, check it out. Expected value to equal required, but we received form validation message. So, okay, so that's not, this shows me that what I'm doing with text is not correct. I do not want form validation message to be returned. This is like the outer text or a text equivalent of the element itself. What I want is kind of the inner text of this element. So I'm going to actually Google on this. Enzyme, React Native, how to get text. Shallow text with React Native doesn't work. I think I ran across this with some contains text title. Okay, so you could check against the actual JSX there. Find text first child props data to equal title. Interesting. Prop title, no. Shallow won't render out your view tag. Oh, shallow won't render out your tag. So, this might be related to the fact that in React Native, we have to use shallow for our enzyme testing. I've seen other ways to do it. A few of you have actually raised, I think this might have been Juddy probably, and maybe some others, raised alternative ways to do React Native component testing. This could be a good occasion, maybe next time, to check into that. But shallow only renders the core component I'm testing, not subcomponents. So it tracks in the component tree that there is a form validation message, but it says, like, I don't know what's passed to it. Like, I'm not really sure. So, this is interesting. Let's at least, I'm not sure the best way to go about this, but let's try this first approach here. We check that it contains that right there. Yeah, well, let's play around. We just want to get something passing that's kind of confirming the wrong thing, and we can always refactor the test later. So it's saying right now, when we call .text, where'd it go? That it's returning form validation message. So let's just assert what we want. We want it to instead have form validation message. Is that what they did? No, they did something different. They did contains that. And that'll actually allow us to use JSX, which will be nice. So let's say, I'm not sure. Let's stick with .text for right now. I think it isolates it to this individual element. And so let's just try and say, let's say maybe we want to say form validation message required. It's maybe not the most pleasant in the world, so we can rethink it later. But let's just see. Let's see if we can get it working this way. Let's see if the text element will actually work this way and give us what we want. Okay, so we showed what we're expecting to find here, and we're receiving this instead. Just for the sake of this one test case right now, let's hard code it. And let's see if it passes. I just want to see what the behavior of enzyme is in this case. So that's not the case. So .text is not in fact returning that. It's just returning this. Okay. All right, so that's not going to be what we want. So we are figuring this out in real time. So let's check out what they're doing here. This solution here is checking that the wrapper somewhere contains this JSX. So the overall rendered out thing should contain that. So let's try to rewrite our test to kind of match that. So let's keep this just for reference purposes. We'll say expect wrapper. I'm just comparing to here. Yeah, wrapper contains Form validation message. Looks like I need to import that component here, which is, yeah, that's fine. If we're going to be doing, so for shallow testing, if you're going to be doing assertions against specific component types, you need to import them. And that actually kind of provides you some type safety in a sense. So expect the wrapper contains that to be equal true. We're not checking the test ID right now, but so we'll come back to that in just a second. This is experimentation mode. Okay, so expected received equal expected, expected true, received false. So that test error output is not great, but luckily Jest does show the line in question, so that gives us a little context. So let's actually see if, again, just hard coding this, we can get the test to pass. Again, right now we're just trying to learn how the test framework works. So that is not the case because we have this test ID in here, maybe. So let's see, if it's literally exactly the same JSX there, will it return true? It does, so that's really great. So it's actually doing a testing with the quality of this JSX here. So let's go back to, I like using the test ID. Even though this is the only form validation message component right now, it just feels a little safer and more expressive to have test ID. So let's have the test here, check that the JSX contains that test ID. Required, and then I didn't save it on this side. So let's save changes to the test and the component, and it is in fact passing. So that's great. So so let's see here. Let me see if I can get this format a little bit nicer, so I'm not getting these linter errors. I'm not actually sure this is going to work with the dynamic content, so we're going to need to find out. And look, my indentation is wrong. Maybe this is not the time to be fooling with indentation. Let's see. It wants a comma there, doesn't it? All right. All right, so we've been changing. We have not been doing TDD per se. We've been changing the test and the code. So let's go back up. Now that we know, I mean, we were just playing around at this point. This is kind of a spike to learn how enzyme works in this circumstance. So let's go back and undo the changes we made to the component. Let's actually just have a plain old form validation message there. And I think we're not going to get great feedback here because it's not going to be able to tell that there is a form validation message, but it doesn't have the right ID or anything like that. It's just going to be able to say that that condition we put in there is not going to work. Let's kind of work forward and see if we can get there. So here's our form validation message. It has the right test ID. So now let's update our code to dynamically fill in content in here. That is and we'll say this can be the name error. Restaurant name error message. Let's just call the value restaurant name error message. We'll extract that from the state. So it'll come out of a component state. So therefore we want to have this here. I would like for it to be empty string or null by default. Let's go with null. That's kind of the more there's not an error message that is the empty string. There is no error message to start out. So that feels like what I want. And so now we're saying, okay, so when should this error message be set? Well, this error message should be set if the restaurant name is equal to the empty string there. I just got an idea for something we could do next time, so I'm going to write it in the note. Now, I don't want to get distracted from what I'm doing, but my brainstorm is when you type in the restaurant name field, clear out the error message. We may want to come back and add that feature later. Wait until we resubmit. When you submit, clear out the error message too. Or when you cancel. So now that we're adding this error message, there's a few different more edge cases we might need to cover. So that's a brainstorm. We'll come back to that. I gotta make sure not to close that unedited text file. All right, so when a restaurant name is an empty string, we want to set the state. What we want to set the state to is restaurant name error message should say required. And this should trigger a re-render to fill in required right there. I'm going to put that on another line since it's wrapping anyways. It's the way I like to format my markup-y stuff, JSX or otherwise. And so that should show up, and that should just be a null. Should render nothing when there's no error message there. So this should be enough to get the test to pass, hopefully. And again, we're experiencing uncertainty here because we don't know exactly how enzyme works. And so it's great to be able to not go down a rabbit trail and handle all these other edge cases, but get this test passing and then come in later and add the test for those other scenarios. So let's save it. Is it working? Stay on target. It passes! Woo! All right, it's working. This is great. So let's actually see. I want to see it happen. Again, we have our test passing. Let's at least go back out in our test. Remember, we constrained this to only test submission with invalid data. So let's just make sure there's nothing else in our component test that we've broken. It's good. All our tests are passing. So let's reload and give it a try, and then we'll try our end-to-end test, and if that works, we'll call it a day. Open up new restaurant. Do you think it'll work? Do you think it won't? We've already got that nice visual margin between the text field and the button. Again, that laziness paid off. So let's give it a try and see if we get our error message. Save restaurant. Required. It's not pretty, and it still bumps up against the button again. So my arrogance there has been rewarded with what I deserve. So let's see here. And we type in a restaurant, sushi. Again, we've done nothing to clear that out, but can we save the restaurant? We can. That's great. And now if we make a new one, do you think the error will still show up? I think it will. Yep, the error is still there. So that's not awesome. We're going to need to fix that next time. We'll do that in a component test. But for now, let's go ahead and run our end-to-end test. Again, we don't want to commit code unless we have our test suite passing. If you're in the middle of a new feature build, you can commit code on your feature branch without the end-to-end test suite passing. But I think since these are kind of little standalone things, I prefer to still have the end-to-end test suite passing here. So let's see. Oh, it didn't auto-scroll, but it passed, so we're good to go. All right, sweet. So we need to come back next time and explore. I might do some on the side. We'll see. Well, I likely will to be able to use the time optimally. But we played around a little bit to figure out how to make an assertion against the text of a component within Enzyme here. This is the way we found. We found this helpful Stack Overflow post with some different alternatives. So I'll try to give this a try this week, and we can try to refactor to it next time to see if we want to clean up this test a little bit, and we see when I want to handle these other edge cases so that our validation error message here acts nicely. So let's go ahead and make a commit. In our modal here, we've added form validation message and a restaurant name error message field. We've got this check here for when we set the state in this case. Again, just the minimal production code changes to pass our tests as we have them right now. And then we output the restaurant name error message and the form validation message component. We need it imported into our test to make an assertion against it. We've made this whole category upon submit with invalid data to confirm we get a validation error and on save is not called. And we're good to go. Let's say do not allow submitting empty restaurant name. Cool. So today we did some component testing. And not changed our end-to-end test because we were testing edge cases that we didn't want to test. At least this time we made the call not to test them at the end-to-end test level. We got to play around with some not interesting things, there's no criticism there, but some things that I had not tried before in enzyme component testing. And we experimented. We did a little spiking, going back and forth between our test and our production code to see how the test framework worked and to see what would happen. And then once we found a test setup that we liked, we backed off on our spike. We went back to having our red failing test, and then we got it green by passing the test. And from that, we've gotten feedback on what additional tests we can write to kind of get this feature writing more robustly, but we did not go down a rabbit trail of writing a bunch of component tests at once or writing a bunch of production code at once to handle this validation message that wasn't covered by tests. We could go ahead and write it. Maybe you even are looking at this code and you know exactly the code you would write to handle this. But by waiting until we've got it covered by test, we can ensure that we have good component test coverage. Component tests are super fast, and so by covering them, we can get things to be very safe so that if we totally change the way our component is implemented for our modal in the future, we know we're still safely covered by test. So that's about it. I want to keep this to an hour, so I want to say thanks to all of you for joining on the stream. Thanks to Sam K for bailing me out and helping us get a good set of alternatives for checking when a function, when a mock function is not called. Again, I want you to encourage all of you to check out the repo. Do I have it linked here? No, I did not. But yeah, check out the repo. It's in the show notes. To see the code, I'm going to push up a pull request with the code that we've done today. I'm going to push up recordings of this so you can check it out in the future. I would love for anybody else to join me in the chat on Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. It'd be great to have you here. I'm really just still loving this live streaming. It's been really great. Please send me messages on Twitch or on Twitter. I'm coding it wrong on Twitter. You can judge whether I am coding it wrong or not in my code. And I'll love to check you out next time. I would love to have you join me. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll catch you next time. Time to go to the slide. See ya.